Hi, everybody. So we will get started. We are a minute past noon, and we have, I know all of you know that this is, we are trying to celebrate Cybersecurity Awareness Month in the Ryan College of Business. And celebration in colleges is that you learn more, right? And you learn free and you learn good stuff. And that's what we are trying to do here. You all may have seen our lineup of presentations that we have throughout the month. We are recording the session, so you can always come back to it if you missed any parts of it. Before we get started, I would like to quickly play, and let me, I think I need to do this again. I would like to play a quick 1-minute message from Professor Keppelman, who is the chair of the department. And I'm assuming everybody is able to hear me all right. Tabitha, everything sounds good? Perfect. So let me play this message quickly, and then we'll get started with the two wonderful speakers we have today.
Hi, I'm Leon Kappelman. I'm a professor of information systems, and I'm the chair of the Information Technology and Decision Sciences Department. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of the department to this Cyber October. You're the smart ones, the ones who have decided that this is worth investing some of your time to participate and learn from this great lineup that our faculty has put together for you over the next 4 weeks, the next 4 Fridays. People maybe have gotten a little bit too complacent about the threats of cybersecurity, but these are very real, and they affect not only us as individuals, but our organizations, our families, our finances, and yes, even national security in our country. Not only that, there's great job opportunities in cybersecurity at all levels of the economy, from small businesses to giant government organizations, the military, and all kinds of devices too. Because as we connect more and more devices to the internet, those devices become vulnerable entry points as well. So I welcome you to Cyber October on behalf of the ITDS department, and I hope you really learned something. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dr. So that was Professor Keppelman from our chair of the ITDS department. And we have many faculty members. The organization committee member list is here that all helped us put together this program. So talking about today's presentations, we will start with Gerald, and I will not say this correctly, and apologies for that, Jerry. We are going to talk about password security one-on-one with LogMeIn. And this will, without giving away much about this presentation, we're going to learn a bunch of things about passwords, right? And one would think, what's so big deal about passwords? But we will know what is a big deal. A lot of the issues start with having, our passwords being stolen, etc. So we are going to have that wonderful presentation. Jerry is a CISO for logmein.com, and he has a very wide and strong experience in the area. I'm not going to say anything more. I'll have Jerry go ahead and start with his presentation. Thanks, Jerry, for finding time for our students and us. We have a bunch of faculty members also in the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Hope you guys can hear me okay. So I'll start from here. It's like I'll start sharing my screen as well and then go right into the presentation. So hoping this is working right now. Let me just see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Fabulous. All right. So yes, welcome to a quick overview of a password security presentation. It's like just as a matter of introduction, I'm the, like Deepak says, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for LogMeIn. That means that I'm accountable and responsible for the security for the entirety of our product portfolio, as well as our corporate resources, so the back-end office, corporate IT, et cetera, et cetera. Log Me In, just as a quick note of this, is a software as a service company. We have roughly 15 major products that we are actively selling and operating on behalf of our customers. And they include things like, for example, LastPass. That's one of the reasons, I guess, why I'm here. But also things like GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, Bolt360, Log Me In Pro Central, which is a tool often used by IT departments. So a lot of software as a service tools that obviously do require a high degree of security across the portfolio. I've been in this space for 10 years. It seems like a long time ago. It's been really quite a while. I was before at Demandware, which is now Salesforce. I worked at the MITRE Corporation, which some of you may know as a nonprofit organization that does a lot of work in security. And I've been also at Sun Microsystems before. Myself, I'm holding a Master of Science in Theoretical Physics, not exactly along the lines of security or IT, but one of the things that I have learned during my time at academia is to solve complex problems. And I think that's something that you definitely need today when looking at security across the board. For the rest of this presentation, I would really like to encourage everyone to ask questions. I think we can use the chat. If there's something super urgent, feel free to point that out. But I think I also want to make sure that we have a little bit of a question and answer session towards the end. So we can do it either way. Super open to this. So let's go straight into passwords a second. What I just wanted to do is take a little bit of a trip down memory lane. It's like, where do passwords come from? Passwords really are, you could say, definitely historic, but almost prehistoric. So if you go back in history, it's like, and you look at even how the Roman army was organized, they had a officer rank or officer specialization called the Tessarius, who was the manager of the passphrases that were used in order to authenticate troops to each other, like at night for watches, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how far back the concept of a shared secret really goes, and how serious it was taken at that point in time that they really delegated specialized soldiers in order to manage this. We also had a bunch of other things along those lines. So the concept of challenge response, again, goes way back, and one of the well-known ones is the Flash and Thunder during the D-Day operation in World War II. It's like, in order for the soldiers to identify themselves as they were landing on the different beaches, they didn't know exactly who would be behind the next corner or behind the next bush. So they had this concept of Flash and Thunder as a challenge and response, and only if that matched, then they knew that the respective other party was on the same side. So again, it's like I was saying before, the concept of a shared secret is something that has been around for literally millennia, literally like the beginning of humanity. It's something that is very easy to understand and also very deeply ingrained in terms of like how we work. And I think that is something to keep in mind if we start to take a look at why people are using passwords, why these dreaded passwords are not going away, and what we can do in order to improve this. So let's spool forward a little bit towards the first digital passwords. So the first digital passwords were actually created in 1961 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was for the compatible time-sharing system. That was one of the very first multi-user computers. So it's like the compute time at this in this era was obviously extremely expensive, and you really needed to make sure that the systems could be shared amongst a large number of researchers that needed access. So the CTSS was created, and the basic idea of, I'll just pull my presentation forward. I'm sorry. I seem to be stuck here. Well, it's like the basic idea of moving forward here was effectively to go in and have a time sharing system that would really allow to fairly allocate the appropriate level of time to the respective users. Oh, here we go. Fine. What came with that also was the first password breach. The system was created in 1961, and on the same system in 1962, we had the first password breach. The basic idea was financial gain. Somebody wanted to get access to free compute time and get through this. And the technique that was actually being used, believe it or not, was a stolen password dump. It was actually quite literally a password dump, because on a printer like similar to the one on the back end there was a printout of all the password database that was used due to some bug in the shell, essentially that was being used at that time. So as we were starting to create passwords, it's like we also started to see the first breaches, which is not exactly surprising, but that's where we are. What I found really interesting in preparing for this presentation, and then also looking at things in general, it's like why are we still? I mean, this has been like 70, 80. How long ago? It's like 60 years ago that we really started to do use passwords for systems. It's like we should have really been able to move forward since to get to a point where we can actually use something more clever than passwords. And obviously, there have been a lot of proposals, but something seems to be sticky. And what I would really recommend is everyone is like take a look at this report. It's a little bit older, but it really looked at security usability and deployability of passwords in or like of authentication mechanisms in a comparative kind of manner. So they looked at 35 different authentication mechanisms and compared them essentially to classical passwords. What was interesting, at least at the time, and I think it's not entirely there's definitely been some changes since in terms of technology that we were able to deploy, but passwords do come out very strong in terms of deployability, and we're definitely also quite up there with the usability. Security was a little bit so-so and very dependent on how you did this, but I think that is just something that really seems to be important to note, that even after such a long period of time, passwords were still comparatively strong when they're put into comparison with other kind of authentication mechanisms as well. The reality is like passwords are sticky, and it's like going a little bit deeper into the research there. It's like, and then interpreting this. Why are they so sticky? Well, the first thing is they're extremely well understood by users. Explaining a username and a password, or sometimes even only a password, as a shared secret is something that the vast majority of users will easily be able to grasp, because they've seen this before. They heard something like this before. The whole metaphor of a shared secret is something that that definitely works quite nicely with how people interact with each other or with the general systems, right? So the basic idea there is understood quite nicely. It has also obviously similars and or analogs in the real world. It's like if it's a pin for a lock or a key or something like that, it's like passwords are pretty comparable from that perspective and well understood. They're really easy to implement for developers and admins. It's like if you want to create a new application, if you want to create a new system or service, implementing a password authentication mechanism is, in most cases, as easy as just adding an additional database table to your environment, and then just having like a username password kind of table in there and then calling it a day. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of systems are being created, which leads to a lot of password-related problems. But it's definitely a lot easier for someone who really wants to focus on a particular business use case or an application use case that they want to drive, to really not spend so much time on a complex federated authentication system or integration with multi-factor authentication or all that kind of good stuff that you would really want to use, but instead just say, hey, you know what, I got a username and a password. That's going to do it for now, and then later on we can think about this doing some better authentication mechanism, and often enough later for developing that doesn't really come. And finally, it's like I said, it's also really super easy to set up for IT and admins. It's like if you need to deploy a hard token in order to be able to get access to a system. There's a lot of logistics behind this. If you want to use biometrics, you have to first capture the biometrics and then start making that available. So there's a lot of process work related to making other types of access mechanisms or authentication mechanisms work, which essentially means that passwords do tend to get sticky. All in all, it's like there's inertia. There's a lot of inertia around passwords, and one of the things that we found in some research is that we're not really expecting that passwords are going to go away. I think one of the things that we're going to be seeing is that passwords will eventually not continue to grow as fast anymore, like we've seen this in the past, but they are completely going away is something that I would expect is going to take a long time. So we have those passwords. We know that they're a problem on the one side. On the other side, we do know that we have to deal with them. So what are the best practices that in some form or another have been around now for a while? I'm sure you've all seen in the past the requirement at least 8 characters, like have uppercase, lowercase, and the kind of good fun stuff. Cycle the password every 90 days in order to stay safe. A lot of those kind of recommendations go back to the early 2000s when the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US actually made some recommendations around that, and they've ingrained themselves deeply into the internet, into how we create applications. Unfortunately, they were not really super duper good. There were some issues with those kind of recommendations. One of them being 8 characters is actually really super short, especially in today's age where you can essentially go through a 8-character password, depending on what kind of algorithm you're using to protect that password. You can go through that entire space for brute force hacking that in literally minutes. So 8 characters is not really the best length. Rotating randomly.
Are you advancing the screen, or you are still on MIT 1962?
Oh my God! No, I have been advancing that quite a bit. Thank you for letting me know. I've been having some issues here.
Right. I think your slide number 6 may be a good catch-up point if you want to show that.
Slide number 6. Yes, I will do that. Sorry about that. Let me see. It's like, can you share my screen? See my screen? You know what? I'm just going to go like this. It's like, here we go. Can you see my screen now? Hello?
Yes, we can
Yes.
see.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So I'm going to leave it in this mode. Maybe that's going to be easier. Sorry about that. Okay, so those were the reality today. Passwords are sticky, and they are well understood by users. They are easy to implement for developers. They're easy to set up for IT admins as well. And as such, they really result in a lot of inertia. Just going back one slide as well, because if you haven't seen that, this was the report by the University of Cambridge with regards to the comparison of the different authentication mechanisms. I think this is really a good report, and I'd recommend anyone who's interested taking a look at this. Deepak, I'm also going to make you have the presentation, so please feel also free to distribute it afterwards if people want the URL, okay?
Sure, I will do that. Thanks.
Perfect. So going back to our password management best practices, with all this kind of knowledge, what works and what doesn't work, it's like, what are 3 best ways of dealing with passwords? Well, number 1 is like store your password in a secure way. It's really important that you are not doing anything to store passwords in an insecure way. It's like whether it be something on a spreadsheet or something unencrypted in some passwords. Obscurity is really not a good way of protecting your passwords. Interestingly enough, it's like if you do have a number of passwords that you really want to make store away safely, for example, like a master password or so, paper is actually not so bad. It's like if you store that paper not under your keyboard or on your monitor, but instead in some place, then a written down password is actually pretty good because it's hard to steal electronically. Second things that we say is like going back to the NIST recommendations is use long and strong passwords. So it's like if 8 characters used to be pretty good, 20 characters or 25 or 30 characters is good today. You really want to be significantly above the kind of level where an adversary can potentially break a password even from a hash by brute force, which is right now for like in the simplest cases around like 10 to 12 characters, and depending on how sophisticated they are, it can go a little bit longer. So it's like once you start doing 20 plus characters for your passwords or passphrases, you end up being in a pretty decent position, especially if they're randomly generated and have some other stuff in there. And the other thing is like also obviously is like you really have to use a unique password for every single online account. Why do we say that from a security perspective? It's actually quite simple. It's like if one site, if you're reusing the same password over and over again, and one of the sites gets get compromised and your password leaks in some form or another, the first thing that adversaries are doing is they're starting to go in and are effectively trying that username and that password that they obtained from one side on many other sites. So it's like if there is a breach at Yahoo or LinkedIn or what have you, and those kind of passwords that become available, like I said, the first thing everyone will do who gets their hands on that password dump is going to try this elsewhere. That's called password spraying, and unfortunately, it's super common, and that is how a lot of additional accounts get broken into and then potentially compromised as well. So use long passwords to make it hard to decrypt or to brute force, and use unique passwords across the board. Now, we all know this. It's like this is something that's been around for quite a while, and people have been really effectively going into understanding this, making those recommendations. But after literally years and years of talking about how we should really work around this, it's like where are we today? Where are we in 20? It's like is this really those simple 3 kind of practices? Are people following them? And for this, it's like from a LogMeIn perspective, LastPass perspective, we really went in and did some study, like a market study in this year. So we really were talking to over 3,200 individuals, and mostly in companies across the Western Hemisphere, Europe, and the APEC region as well, and really tried to understand how the overall global awareness and the reality of how passwords are being used looks like. This kind of study is super helpful for ourselves in order to better understand how we can also improve our messaging and then also our product to really help users across the board. So what are some of the things that we found in that study this year, literally this year? Well, it's like it's really comes down to a simple kind of summary. It's like people know what's right. So I think our messaging really started to stick, and people are starting to understand what's going on, but they do not necessarily do the right things. So we heard that 91% of people knowing that the using the same reusing passwords, or it's like using variations or something like that, is definitely a risk. So if you just using your dog's name and then the name of the site and concatenate that, that's one of those kind of things. Or another one's like one of my favorites, like for those systems where you need to change passwords, you have no idea how many passwords are fall 2020 exclamation mark. It's actually scaringly many. So it's like those kind of things are very common, and what we heard is that over 2/3 of people are actually creating passwords that are using these kind of very simple variations, or actively even reusing the same kind of password. What scares me most in this kind of context is that this is up 8% from what we found in 2018. So it's gotten worse, which is like, really? It's like people are realizing that this is bad, but they're still doing it. 80% of folks indicated that it's like if their password, no matter what the account is compromised, is something that they should be concerned about. So it's like why do I say that? It's like, even if it's just a blog or just some social site or whatever, often enough, what an adversary will do is they try to move laterally from one account to the other until they find something that's valuable. And if you think back into 2012 when LinkedIn was breached, what we found afterwards, often enough, is that even administrators at companies were using the same kind of password that they use for LinkedIn, also to protect the company resources. So it's like a password compromise is something you should be concerned about, and most people are, which is good. But almost half of them said that they are really that don't really feel that there's a need to change their password, even if they know it's been compromised. So which is like mind-boggling, but that's where we are. 77% of people said that they feel that they are reasonably well informed in terms of how to protect passwords. But at the same time, we hear that 54% are trying to keep track of their passwords by memorizing them. Mind you, in the recommendations we had before, we were saying, it's like, you really need long passwords, and you really need those passwords to be unique across different sites. So it's what we find there is there's a huge disconnect. Again, it's like one of those areas that that is definitely worthwhile looking at. It's like 42% of all accounts, 42% of people that we asked is like think their accounts are really not worth something to an adversary. And like I said before, based on the kind of lateral movements, based on getting access to additional resources, we are convinced, or we know, that that is not true. It's like even a single broken account can be potentially dangerous. We've seen this even with senior officials in government having their accounts being hacked by somebody being able to break into like a Gmail account, a private Gmail account, then going from there into a mobile phone account, and then moving from there on laterally further and further. So it's like, never underestimate how these things can sometimes be connected to each other, and how important that is. If you look at the larger data breaches across the globe, and there's one report that I highly recommend looking at, is the annual Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, or Verizon DBIR. 81% of breaches are caused, or at the very least related to, weak passwords. So this is one of the main reasons why good companies are falling apart. And those kind of things are critically important. So so we know there's problems. What we should take into consideration there is now, it's like when we look at this this issue, it's like if we want to manage this from a corporate perspective or from a personal perspective, it's really hard to do that. It's like if we can't measure it. Passwords should not be shared outside. I mean, that's the whole point of a shared secret that I'm using. Complexity or unicity across different sites cannot be centrally enforced if you don't have federated kind of systems. Generally, it's like there's not the greatest confidence in password hygiene across the board. So from that, worry about that a little bit. And there's limited ability to effectively coach users across the board. We're doing this right now, so it's like hopefully you're getting a little bit out of this. But one thing that we also found, though, is that if we do provide appropriate contracts, users are in companies and outside actually do generally want to do the right things. And security training and security awareness programs like the ones that we're doing right now, including the Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, do have a positive impact. It's like, it's definitely something where people start to think about. So it's like we just need to get a little bit better in terms of measuring. And I think that's one of the reasons why product, here's a little bit of a pitch, but password managers, like for example LastPass, or other products obviously as well, can be extremely helpful in terms of making a difference there for users across the board. It's any kind of password manager is designed to store them securely. So it's like the first requirement that we had there in the best practices management is like, you can really store your password in a way that is under almost any circumstances more secure than something individual users can come up by themselves. It also allows you to create unique password across different sites and then remember them. right? So it's like if I'm looking at my own password management system, my own LastPass, I have upwards of 450 passwords in there, and it's like there's more coming in every day. All of those passwords are unique for each site. The vast majority of them are longer than 25 characters. And obviously, I don't remember a single one of them. But I don't need to worry about this because I have a password manager, and I know I can get access to this kind of where I need to, and don't really care about this anymore. And that's where you really want to take a look at what kind of password manager you're using. You can obviously use something, build something yourself, or like deploy something yourself on your cell phone, on your laptop. But having a SaaS product, a software as a service product that really makes it accessible anytime and anywhere, but just like logging into that account and then connecting your local device to it, makes it a lot easier. I mean, that's just something that where the work of managing the system in the backend is actually being taken over by somebody like us or some of the other password manager providers, and allows you to focus on the kind of tasks that you actually want to do. You get a lot of benefits from a convenience perspective, whether it's filling those passwords automatically when you want to log in, or it's like sharing this with someone. But also, you also get alerted if your personal information is at risk. So it's like what we are doing, and what some of the other password managers are also doing, is to do the appropriate kind of integration with like backend services that monitor the internet for if a password breaches, and then can alert you. It's like, hey, it's like you've been recently on Barnes and Nobles. That was one of the most recent ones. It's like, and we have suspicion that the password may have been compromised. So we strongly recommend to change your password for that particular site because there was a recent breach. And that is definitely something where it helps to stay really on top of those kind of things. There's obviously also a component for this if you look at the a corporation, at an enterprise, and how you really want to manage passwords for employees. If you just do this on an individual by individual perspective, that's super interesting. But it's like having a system deployed that really allows you to take a larger look at how how your entire employee population is actually dealing with passwords, gives you then a much better baseline for performing risk assessments across your digital enterprise, and figuring out, it's like, okay, it's like in generally the vast majority of my users are doing the right thing, or maybe not, right? So it's like you can then fine tune awareness and training to make sure that you get to the right spot. The last item that I just wanted to briefly touch upon, because I think it is super important, is multi-factor authentication. So for those that are not super familiar with this, multi-factor or two-factor authentication refers to using two or more factors, authentication factors, before granting access. So what are factors? Factors are not necessarily two passwords. That's just like one factor. It's like it's a knowledge factor. We typically differentiate between three factors. One is something you know. One is something you have, so that can be a soft or a hard token, like some phone that is used as a push device, a smart card, or some other token that you would really need to own or have instead of just know. And then finally, there's a third class of factors, which are biometric factors. So it's like this is something you are, like a fingerprint, a face scan, your DNA sequence, and there are a couple of other interesting ones, obviously, as well. So it's like if you use more than one factor, if you use like a password and a smart card, or like a hard token, you, as an adversary, it's like you really need to now break the password, but then also need to break the other half of that kind of authentication mechanism. You would need to steal that hard token that automatically generates numbers. We have, I think all of us have multi-factor authentication tokens and we had them for a very long time, which is essentially our ATM cards. If you go into an ATM, you need the card itself and you need the PIN. So that's the classic example of a two-factor authentication solution. It is actually amazingly safe once you start doing this, especially if it goes significantly beyond what you know. There are some areas of interest that you want to dig a little bit deeper and think a little bit harder about this. And one is like the complexity of managing some of those additional factors. So if you, for example, want to manage hard tokens like the ATM cards, you need to have a means of distributing that, and the logistics around that can sometimes be complicated. If you want to have smart cards, it's like you have to print those cards, you have to program them, and then you have to get them into the hands of the users. That's usually super easy if it's like just a few people that you need to worry about. But if you're a large company and you want to deploy, for example, USB dongles, UV keys, that users should be using in order to authenticate, it becomes actually pretty hard, because what happens if an employee loses their key? They can't work, right? So how do you get maybe a second one to them? It's like, what happens if they break and they're like on a business trip? It's like you need to FedEx or UPS something to them really quickly. So the management ownership tokens can be hard. Same for biometrics. It's like managing those kind of factors is not easy. It's like, in order for a fingerprint to work, you first need to take it. Well, it's like on a phone, it's actually pretty easy, but it's like if it's a larger kind of system, then that kind of management really needs to come into play as well. And that is going back to what I was saying earlier. That's one of the reasons why passwords are so having so much momentum, and why they're still so often being used, because they don't have that kind of level of complexity. There's also something that is like whether you use really true multi-factor authentication or just a fancy single factor. What do I mean by that? What I really want to say there is that if you're only using something you own, like a device, mobile device or so, and no kind of knowledge token that is required for that, you're really a single factor. Right? So it's like if it's just a USB dongle that you need to authenticate, and you can do that from anywhere or any device, it's really just a single factor. So keep in mind that single factor is in and by itself a lot easier to compromise, even if it's a physical factor or a biometrics factor. Biometrics come with their excuse me, with their own kind of challenges. First of all, I got to take a closer look. It's like if you set up as a biometric system, does that store the biometrics in the central database or in the decentralized kind of system where it's close to users? What we're currently used to today on our phones is a decentralized kind of thing. It's like Android or iOS phones have secure enclaves that actually store the information about the biometrics that is used to authenticate to the device locally. And those kind of information doesn't necessarily leave the device, which maintains a high degree of privacy. But there are other centralized biometric systems, database of like hundreds, thousands, or millions of users, and keep those kind of biometrics in those centralized databases for authentication purposes. Typically, governments or so it's like would deploy something like that. So what happens there then is that there are challenges from a privacy perspective as well. It is really, really important that you end up being in a situation where you protect the user's privacy and make sure that those kind of centralized systems are really not something that gets in the way of or that becomes concerning from that privacy kind of perspective. I'm just trying to unlock my screen here. What's also needs to be considered is is how easy is it to reproduce or to copy a multi-factor token. If you look at soft tokens, those are the kind of like number generators that you sometimes have on your phone in the form of a Google Authenticator, or we have the LastPass Authenticator. Depending on how you do this, they can actually be copied. Those are time-based one-time passwords, and they can be reproduced, so they can be stolen, similar to a password, and that's something to really keep into mind as well as you do a risk assessment across that. And then lastly, one thing that I think is also important is like how easy is it to reset a factor. Resetting a password is easy. Resetting a smart card or a push device or something like that is a little bit harder, but still doable. But resetting your biometrics is not possible, or it's actually possible, but it just hurts a lot. So you end up being in a situation where you really need to take all of these kind of things into consideration when you start to go into multi-factor authentication solutions as well. I want to pause here and like open it up to like Q&A. Just like see how what if there are questions that I can answer.
Right. So there was a great introduction and a wide understanding of passwords starting from when they were used first in Roman days. So that was a great presentation. Thanks, Jerry, for sharing with us. One question that has come from Judy Delay is, what's the average cost of a good password manager?
Well, it depends a little bit. It's like there are plenty of password managers that are available for free. So if you look at LastPass, for example, it's like I can only speak for us. The basic edition, the community edition, so to speak, is a free version, and you can use it across all the different devices. If you want to buy the professional version of LastPass or similar kind of solutions, you end up paying roughly between $30 and $50 a year for a password manager. So that's a typical kind of number that you end up getting to. Obviously, it's like if you want enterprise kind of features, that can be a lot more. But I think the key message here is like there are good free or almost free versions available, and there's and the overall cost for something on an annual basis, if you want to go for a professional product, is less than one coffee a month.
Right. So another question from Lauren is, what do you think of passphrases?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I was saying, it's like passwords. Some of the requirements we have around passphrases is really we want them to be long, and we want them to be complicated, and ideally unique. What passphrases do is like they're long. It's like if you take a whole sentence, for example, and just put dots or exclamation marks or something like that between the words, or sometimes even spaces, depending on how the systems work. That's definitely a way on how to create a very long and very unique password. Again, it's like if you want to do this for 200 different sites and have like 200 different passphrases, that can be hard to manage, and that's where again it's beneficial to actually have a password manager. But as a password for example, for a master passphrase into a password manager, those are absolutely ideal.
Right. So we'll have a last question here, and that is, what's the difference between the community password manager and password manager you purchase?
All right, so it's like for LastPass, this looks like this. You get the basic functionality in the free version, the community version, how you want to call that. So it's like you can manage an unlimited number of sites in this. It's like you can have this on as many devices as you want. You do not necessarily have the same kind of sharing capabilities. So if you want to share passwords or documents safely between you and other users, that's something that's not quite so easy, or it's actually not supported. So from that perspective, you have stronger limitations. So that there actually is also a number of comparisons on the LastPass.com website if you want some more information.
Right, and we have a chat message from somebody who is part of our Cyber Messenger program, and that you know that they have their organization using LastPass for all accounts, and the question is, what do you recommend about LastPass password to be the most secure? So, how do you consider it to be most secure? And I think after this we will move on to the next one. So
absolutely, yeah. So I think this question goes for the is focused on the master password for LastPass. So just to explain, there, it's like the master password for LastPass is really the source for how we encrypt the passwords in the vault, and that's actually super important to highlight in terms of like how we do this, because we cannot reset master passphrases. It's like all the encryption always happens on the client devices. So log me in. It's like if we get if you sign up for LastPass and you start your own kind of vault in your environment, we will never see your passwords, because your master passphrase is really the that is how we derive the actual encryption key for locking this, and we never see the unencrypted version. Now, that makes it obviously very important to choose a very secure kind of like a master password. If you just use LastPass 123, that is something that can be tried out pretty quickly, and it's like is not recommended. And we actually have some safeguards against that in the product as well. So you want to create again a master passphrase that is very, very long. So think about a long sentence in one of your favorite books. Think about some number of words that mean something to you, some lyrics, I don't know, a haiku or so, that can really help you create a very long string that you use as your master passphrase, and use that as the baseline for use that as the master password into it. That'll generate a guarantee on the one side. You'll never forget it because it's a phrase, it's not some random characters. It's very long, so it provides a high degree of entropy in order to generate that key, and it makes it very hard to break into afterwards. So it's like that's really how you would do this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for finding time for us. A lot of good information, including for our faculty members, where you mentioned some academic study that those interested can take it forward, and for students, very actionable advice. I would like to say that we are also, during this month, we are also running a program we call Cyber Messenger. Many of the attendees would know about it, but we have some very dedicated volunteers who have taken on task of learning best cyber practices and teaching it to 5 or more people in their own sphere of influence, their friends and family. And on that subject, let me tell you, if your password is compromised, your email password is compromised, one of the worst things that can happen is that somebody can use that and send bad software, bad links to your friends and family and compromise their machines. So if my password is compromised, I may be putting my friends and family at risk. Considering that, I also sent a link in the chat where you can go yourself and check for if your email passwords are compromised or not, right? Because of the data breaches that happens. Okay, I will stop now and introduce our next speaker, Professor Lineros. I'm sure many of you know about him. You may have taken classes with him. He's a professor in accounting, and he's going to tell us how to be safe at home. And we all should know that we are spending a lot of time at home nowadays, and it is important to learn what Professor Lineros has to say, both regarding accounting and about also the cybersecurity. So Professor Lineros, thanks for finding time for everybody, and I will now stop talking.
Thank you, Dr. Pravin. I appreciate this opportunity to share my background. I teach in the accounting department, and I teach information systems and accounting systems. My background, though, is I come from being an IT auditor, and as an IT auditor, we would regularly check these types of things, but at the commercial level. However, again, a lot of these principles at the commercial level, apply also in the home. And it's also interesting to note the differences between commercial protection of networks and residential networks. So let me just dive right in, share my screen. Okay, can someone confirm they can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's dive right in. Some of the stuff was covered by Gerald, and some wasn't. We'll kind of focus on the stuff that wasn't. So the learning objectives today, the first one is why are home networks so vulnerable? So we'll explore that. Well, obviously, we'll explore what can we do about that vulnerability. And then hopefully as a carrot at the end of this, we're going to go ahead and hack into my router here at home I'll have to do it kind of judiciously to not reveal public IP addresses and stuff like that, but it'll be kind of fun to show you what it looks like when you're looking at someone's router. So let's start with this. They always say start with the bang, so let's start with the bang.
Legal trouble for Amazon and its Ring cameras, a lawsuit claiming that the products are simply too vulnerable to hacking. And ABC's Marcy Gonzalez is on the story this morning. Marcy, good morning.
Dan, good morning to you. The lawsuit says the big concern here is not just the hackers we've seen in all those videos scaring people, including children in their living rooms and bedrooms, but also the cyber stalkers allegedly using these security systems to secretly spy on people. The suit alleging Ring knew its systems were vulnerable to hackers, but failed to do anything. Those recent chilling invasions of privacy.
That tree is looking really, really good, guys.
Played out in home after home.
Who is that? I'm your best friend. I'm Santa Claus.
With hackers peering in, at times taunting residents through their Ring camera systems.
What's up, homie? I still see you.
Now prompting a class action lawsuit. A father of 3 in Alabama filing the suit, accusing Ring and its owner Amazon of lax security standards.
The allegation is that they had the tools at their disposal to make their system more hack-proof, but they didn't do it.
John Baker Orange claiming the Ring camera above his garage was hacked, allowing a stranger to talk to his kids, encouraging them to get closer to the camera as they played basketball in the driveway. Ring has stated the incidents across the country were in no way related to a breach or compromise of Ring's security. The CEO sharing this explanation on the Tamron Hall show last week.
What happened was this came from an outside, someone using the same username and password elsewhere that was gained from that, and then they logged into that user's account through that.
But the lawsuit alleges Ring was blaming customers for failing to create strong security passwords to distance itself from liability, saying the company failed to provide sufficiently robust security measures such as two-factor authentication.
It really strikes a chord in the heart of everyday Americans, and I do think that they have leverage in that regard when it comes to any settlement negotiations.
And Ring is staying silent on this, saying the company does not comment on pending litigation. Whit.
Okay, the reason I wanted to show you that is to show you that this is a real problem. The home network, to a large extent, is becoming more and more of a target for a number of reasons that we'll get into. And some of the stuff can be actually quite scary as to the ability to look into your house as you have more and more connectivity with the internet.
The legal trouble for Amazon and its Ring cameras, a lawsuit claiming that
All right. Again, to emphasize the point, that COVID has created a particular environment where more and more people are working from home, and it's causing some kind of a surge in this. A lot of attacks on homes, especially during the lockdown. So it begs the question, why is the home network, why is it that it's so difficult to secure? Well, one of the reasons it's difficult to secure is there tends to be a trade-off between functionality and security. What we tend to see at the commercial level and the home level is that as security goes up, as you have more and more encryption, as you have more and more safeguards, as you have more longer passwords, as you have VPN, as you have these different enhancements of security, functionality, efficiency, network throughput starts to drop. And of course, the opposite happens, that as you have higher functionality, we tend to notice that security drops. I always tell my students that, who could envision a conversation where you leave Target and you're walking out to your car and you say to the person next to you, wow, did you notice how secure we felt when we were checking out? The whole time we were checking out, it just felt so incredibly secure. As opposed to the more common conversation is, hey, did you notice how long it took them to check us out? And did you notice all the questions they asked us? And did you notice that security tends to consume time and create inefficiency? And that's one of the reasons these manufacturers, when they create devices, what they really, from a marketing perspective, are focusing on is functionality. Reason number two, a lot of IoT. There's an enormous amount of IoT. You have, in a typical house, I mean, you might have the entertainment system connected to the internet, either inside the house or through the phone. I know I'm pretty bad about having a lot of smart plugs now. Obviously, the thermostats are connected, the webcams, which of course in there you get into Nest and other products. Nest is not alone. You're getting more and more of the doors that open with tokens instead of keys. You have all sorts of connected devices in the home, which increase the amount of attack vectors, the amount of different ways you can attack a house. Reason number 3: home networks are different. Okay, they're kind of architecturally different than professionally managed business networks for a number of reasons. And this kind of, if you are involved in commercial versions of this, it's easier for you to understand why there's a difference. So for example, in a corporate network, just to borrow the UNT network domains, you might declare that these devices here are going to be called UNT, the UNT domain. It could be the dog domain, the cat domain. Basically, the whole idea behind a domain is you point to some devices and you declare that we're going to call these UNT. This is even overly simplistic because this seems to imply that we're all in one location. In reality, through virtualization, this machine and this machine and this machine in Rio, these 3 might be virtualized together and called UNT. But let's not introduce that complexity at this point. Let's start just talking about being geographically co-located. So you might call this UNT. You might call this, I don't know. Let's just call this Eagle. I think we use EagleNet. You might call this something else. Let's just call it the ABC domain. And what you can do at the commercial level is you can configure, right? You can configure these domains differently. You can sit there and say, this domain has a lot of sensitivity. So we're going to put a set of security controls around that. And this one is a little bit less, so we're going to have just moderate controls over it. And then maybe ABC is public. Maybe we are comfortable with these devices having access to the internet, and maybe this is just like a guest network or something like that. So you're able to stratify and segregate, and at the domain level, using domain controllers, you can control security. Even a small company, even if you're working with just a small company, will usually, if they're well positioned, they'll declare that a certain level of machines are a certain domain. Maybe you call them ABC, and maybe you configure these differently. And then maybe the printer you're really, really sensitive about in a law firm. So maybe you have this one completely hardened. And by hardened, I mean it won't talk to anything except one device inside the company. So even in a small and medium-sized business, you see evidence of the ability to control devices in kind of a stratified manner. Now, contrast that with what happens in the typical home network, where you have, let me get rid of this, hang on. Okay. In the typical home network, it tends to be very flat. What tends to happen is everything, right, is in like one domain. Usually it'll be something like a work group. I've seen it where it's named just work group. And all the devices in here are kind of, from a security perspective, kind of treated the same, unless the individual has the knowledge that's required to treat this PC, which has sensitive retirement information, differently. For the most part, home networks tend to be just flat, and everything is basically inside of one domain, unless the person has a certain level of knowledge and can start mimicking what you see at the commercial level. But this flatness, right, this homogeneous security stance is something that can be exploited by hackers. Reason number 4, devices on home networks, and of course this was less of a problem, a couple of years ago, but of course there's so many devices now on home networks, are not actively managed. They basically are not actively managed, and what I mean by that is each device has its own user account, each device has its own password standards, it might have its own configuration, it might be subject to software updates at different times, so you don't tend to have, unless you're a sophisticated home network administrator, you don't tend to have software updates that you push out with something like Active Directory out to all the devices all at the same time at the operating system level. You don't tend to have that. Every device is kind of a wild, wild west. it's harder to manage the environment, as I said a minute ago, because it lacks homogeneity. You can't really take one action and affect the 5 to 8 devices that are connected, for example, to your router. This can lead to a lot of things. One of them is password reuse, which Gerald did a great job of talking about. And password reuse is pretty prevalent. I know I won't ask people to pipe in, but I will ask you to use a thought bubble over your head. You know, in Denton, for example, you know, how many people have the word eagle somewhere in their password? I mean, that stuff like that. It's been, I know some of the people that have done work in password audits, they noticed, for example, in Austin, that an enormous number of Longhorn is in the passwords. And of course, here in Dallas-Fort Worth, you know, you'll see variations of Cowboys and Dallas and stuff like that. People, for the most part, are very bad at creating passwords. And the problem, of course, is that this is easy to solve. Let's go ahead and solve it. Let's give people passwords like this. The problem with a password like this, a very complex password like this, is that then what people do is they can't possibly memorize this. So what they do is they write it down, or God save them, they put it in their phone or something like that. And that's the other side of the problem. But as if you enforce password rigor and make it extremely complex, then you get the other opposite problem that people aren't reusing passwords, but they can't remember them, so they're placing them in different places so that they can remember them, and that's a problem. You have a lot of unpatched devices, drivers, unpatched devices. I would add to this, in addition to unpatched, a lot of devices will have version updates, you know, where they update the version and people don't follow that version up, which that version, the new version of your smartphone, or the new version of your you know, Apple Watch or Samsung Watch, whatever, smartwatch, that version may carry with it some security that you wouldn't have had if you don't up version. So up versioning is a problem. Patching is a problem. Unsecured versions of software, it's not unusual for, let's say that the version of software running now is 0, and there's a -1 version that's still running out there. People are using it, a -2 version that's still up there and running, and it's being used. What tends to happen is, you know, you get deeper and deeper into these negatives, and it can be very insecure. You can have a lot of security problems because those old versions were in, you know, the old version of the software could not predict the future, and the future was in 2 years and 18 months and 6 months, a new attack exploit was going to be made available to attack this piece of software. But you can't predict. I mean, you can't sit there and write software and realize that you have a vulnerability to a new attack vector. So the lack of people being on the latest version, as I pointed out, is a big problem. Number 5, access to devices on home networks is not tightly controlled. I can definitely vouch for that, having had small children years ago. Children, spouses, friends, most of them can easily hop on a laptop. They can easily, unfortunately, hop on your mobile device, especially if it's unprotected. This speaks loudly to locking, you know, locking, especially like your laptop, your phone. And by locking, of course, I don't mean physically lock. I mean like Control-Alt-Delete, where, you know, it locks. A lot of people never have their laptop ever locking at all, and that's dangerous. Again, if somebody just pops in, they can create a lot of without, you know, it could be with purpose, with malintent. It can be by accident that they can actually create quite a vulnerability, you know, on a laptop. It can lead to a lot of malware infections, unlicensed software, visiting sketchy websites, which creates all sorts of troubles into itself. Generally speaking, a good practice is, if you're going to have children with laptops, it's better to get them just a Chromebook. Just give them their own device and not let them use yours. And of course, you can experience physical damage to the device, or it can be lost. Physical damage, if your laptop accidentally fell into a tree grinder, you know, that's, I guess, okay. I guess that's okay. The problem more is when it's lost. I know I saw a study not long ago that in the island of Manhattan, up in New York, on an average year, about 10,000 smartphones are recovered by taxis and by Ubers and Lyfts. So about 10,000 people a year are leaving their smartphone inside of the vehicle, and this is the ones we know about. These are the ones where an honest person says, hey, somebody left it here. I don't know what to do with it, but at least they reported it to their company. So that it's really easy that as we've entered more and more miniaturization, it's easier and easier to lose your AirPods. It's easier to lose your phone, and people on a regular basis do. Reason number 6, users typically lack the training. So there's an education gap required to secure a home network. I've kind of made allusion to that already. Obviously, understanding the security that's necessary, especially for routers, is often lax or completely non-existent. Understanding the vulnerabilities of Wi-Fi is important, but it's often untaught. I know in corporate environments, I would talk to people of the dangers of Wi-Fi, and for a lot of them, this was something that was completely new to them. They had no idea that they were so vulnerable on their Wi-Fi. I know there's great YouTube videos of people, white hat hackers, people that are just showing where the vulnerabilities are, and they would in a network, a free Wi-Fi at a Starbucks, they would run software and they would start hopping onto different people's devices and then walking up to them with their laptop and saying, look, here's what you're looking at. You need to be more careful. Obviously, this can lead to technology frustration. You can have bad or absent security planning. Most people don't have a security plan. If you ask them, hey, what's your plan for keeping your information safe in the home? They're like, they'll kind of, say firewall. They're not exactly sure what the plan is. And also give up. You see some of that where they feel that it's beyond, they don't have the training, that maybe they don't want to invest in the time for the training, fill in the blank, but they just kind of give up. And that give up is something that is exploited, definitely exploited by hackers. Given all this, what are you supposed to do? What we're driving at here is, let's pivot over to what we're supposed to do. Basically, the answer is to make yourself a hard target. Make yourself what you're going for here. And I'll make reference to this in a second. What you're going for here is diversion. You can't prevent someone trying to hack your home network, but diversion means that you're too hard a target. It's easier to just move on to someone who's not encrypting traffic, or who's not protecting their router, or who doesn't use best practices. This reminds me of a story of, I had a friend that lived in the country, and he had this horrible problem with fire ants. But luckily, one of his college buddies was someone who was in pesticide. He had access to pesticides. He said, hey, I'll go out to your ranch and I'll dump, stuff for the fire ants, and you'll get rid of them. It'll take a while, a couple of weeks, but we'll get rid of them. So he showed up and, sprayed and, dumped God knows how much toxic chemicals into the soil. And then my friend was relating, the one who had received this service, that about a month later, six weeks later, he was talking to his friend basically across the fence. And his friend across the neighbor was telling him, man, you won't believe it, but I have got so many fire ants now. I mean, I can't believe how many fire ants I have. I've never had this many fire ants. What's happening here is diversion. And what you want to try to do is kind of divert people away from you and have you recognized as a hard target. Practicing defense in depth, if you practice defense in depth, you will achieve diversion. You can't lower your risk to 0. 0 doesn't exist. 0 only exists in math. It doesn't exist out in the real world here of security, but you can shift your probabilities. So passwords. Let's start with passwords. The first thing is don't use the same password on multiple accounts. That's been covered by Gerald. That's just asking for trouble. If you're curious, well, you saw in the Ring video where they were made vulnerable, by the fact that the person had a password that was common to the Ring and common to their home. And when their home password for their router got hacked, they were able to hack into the device. So you can't use the same password. Don't share passwords. Passwords are not for sharing. And that includes screen locks. If you have screen locks where you lock down your laptop stuff, don't share that. It's just nothing but trouble comes from it. Change your password often, every 6 months. However, I think 6 months obviously is the best practice, but some people adopt others. Obviously, the more you change it, the more of a hard target you become. And obviously, I mean, I feel odd, but don't type your password into your phone. Okay, please don't type your password on your phone. You get your phone hacked, And now there's an explosion of hacks across all websites. Better yet, my recommendation, and it's just mine, stop using passwords, switch to passphrases. Think of how difficult it is to remember this password. Let's say 4LH, small I, big L, asterisk, exclamation. Think of how hard it is to remember that password, and honestly, how short it is. And it's relatively short. It only has a couple of characters, 7 characters, and it's still relatively hard to remember that. And then when you switch to a passphrase, like Mary put 3 green frogs in the pesto sauce, exclamation. That's just so much easier to remember, and it's really very difficult to crack. This is a very difficult password to crack if you were using a password cracker, because one of the beauties of human communication is that you can think of a sentence that's never ever existed before, and it can still make a lot of sense to you. By the way, pesto sauce does not have frogs in it. Do not use common same passwords across different platforms. If this is difficult for you, and this was covered great by Gerald, think about using a password manager or a hardware key. Some people use hardware keys to where to do certain functions on their laptop. Not only do they need a password, but they have to have like a Yubico hardware key or Kaspersky. So they have to put a key in the USB port and it has to recognize it before they can go, before the software will progress. Always use multi-factor authentication. That was covered before. And this is especially true. I'm going to borrow a story from a colleague of mine that this individual had the WhatsApp was hacked, and it did not have 2-factor authentication. And man, it can create a lot of harm. As was pointed out earlier, you can create a lot of harm if someone can impersonate you. So always Venmo, Square, all these apps that you use, be sure, and you can, all of them are going to have some form of 2-factor authentication. And yes, it's gonna, your efficiency your efficiency is gonna drop, right? It's the usability is gonna drop, because like when you do certain things, it's gonna force a text back to your phone, and you're gonna have to do a challenge response with your phone. But again, it's worth it for the peace of mind. Whenever possible, try to create biometrics, especially in banking applications, especially on those, try to do biometrics to where not only do they have to steal your credentials, but now they're going to have to, steal the data associated with your face. Browsing the internet, practice safe browsing. This means avoiding sketchy websites. Sketchy websites are well known for being incredibly infected with malware. Anything that's not safe for work, illegal, BitTorrent, which BitTorrent has legal uses, but you know what I'm talking about. Pirate Bay, you really should not visit these sites. You're just asking for a lot of trouble. Most people are not going to have the sophistication to visit these with a proxy server, so they can't be identified. But again, it's just, if you get hacked visiting these sites, you should not be surprised. If you want to avoid accidentally hitting a dangerous website, there are some products, Web of Trust, HTTPS Everywhere, Dr. Weblink Checker. Some of these are free, some of them cost a negligible amount. It just depends on how much level of service you want. But they can give you a browser alert where it pops up and it says, hey, you're heading towards a dangerous website. Without a doubt, you have to be terrified, not just afraid. You have to be terrified of email. And increasingly, SMS and MMS, these both go to your phone. These have links in them. Increasingly, you have to be just terrified of SMS and MMS because any kind of clicking on any of this stuff adds a lot of risk to your profile. When you get email, when you get something and you look at it and you go, wow, that's suspicious. Go in, if you hover or hit right mouse click properties, you'll see who this is coming from. And you'll notice this address, right, has nothing to do with this. Okay, and this gives you an idea of who exactly is actually sending this. The bad news, unfortunately, is this is a hacker that is, I guess, kind of, I don't want to say lazy, but they're just trying stuff. You can actually spoof this email address and make it look like a legitimate one for, in this case, Yang Nang. But again, you're just trying to create some layers of defense to where you can at least protect yourself against hackers that are not either lazy or they don't have that level of sophistication. Backup. This is really important. Practice retrieving information that you've actually stored in the cloud or SSD, solid state drive. Keep in mind that many cloud storage sites are better protected than users' hard drives. I know there's a mindset that, no, I don't want to put stuff on Google Drive, right? Because I don't know if they're going to protect it, right? I want to put stuff on Dropbox because I don't know if they're going to protect it. And the people that are saying this have a right to say this as long as they are adequately protecting their hard drive and the router that potentially can access it. You know, because again, a lot of times Google Drive, Dropbox, even Amazon storage has a lot more encryption and a lot more protection than you would have. If you have important files, password protect them. So if you have a file that is sensitive, you can password protect the file and you can encrypt that file. It's pretty easy to do. I won't get into it here for time reasons, but you just Google this and you can password protect the file, which again slows your ability to access it and stuff, and encrypt it. And another thing that's kind of interesting that most people don't know is you can zip a file. So you can PK-zip, I use PK-zip. You can zip a file, and then in order to unzip that PK-zip file, you can put a password on it. So that's kind of cool because that would mean that you can zip it up, and then if somebody intercepts the file and tries to unzip it, they can't get access to it because they don't know the password. Firewalls, make sure your firewall's on first. On a Mac, I put some basic instructions here on how to do it. I won't go through the instructions, but this, it's pretty easy to turn the firewall on if it happens to be off. And then on PC, it's pretty easily control panel, system security, and turn on Windows Defender. Antivirus, make sure your antivirus protection is on and fully updated. Don't put off AV updates. That creates holes in your defense. If the software application you're using is older than -2, you are vulnerable. So please up version, as I mentioned before. Version updates sometimes have security holes that are patched, and especially if they're in between a security cycle. Microsoft's been known to put security type data into up versions. Mobile devices are particularly vulnerable. You can lose them, you can drop them. There can be signal interception since they're almost exclusively wireless. And shoulder surfing, you can't underestimate the power of shoulder surfing. I know in airports, people are particularly very comfortable typing in things, and a lot of times it's not that hard to intercept what's being put in to the phone. Avoid free Wi-Fi. There is no free Wi-Fi. There's always Wi-Fi with cost. If you use your phone, be sure you use VPN. If you're going to be forced to use Wi-Fi, don't do anything sensitive. This is the wrong time to move $50,000 between accounts. And by all means, use VPN. Cellular connection, if you have an air card that you type into this, or you put into the side of your laptop, it's slower. It's gonna be a little bit slower, and you might get a little buffering and stuff, but it's much harder to crack. I know one of the previous speakers 2 weeks ago talked about how 4G LTE and stuff, it's pretty strong. It's a pretty strong encryption protocol and relatively hard to break. Bear in mind in all of this with mobile devices is even if you take enormous trouble in protecting stuff, be cognizant of the fact that voice communications are vulnerable as well. Home routers. So change to default passwords on your router. I'll show this in a second. To change your router login information, you enter your router's IP address. Tell you what, let's not do that. Let's just do it. So it says, if you're here, check if you have any unauthorized people or devices on your Wi-Fi. Another way to do that is change your Wi-Fi password, which is different from your admin password. Stop broadcasting your SSID. I'll show you that on my router here in a second. If your wireless settings, you may have the option for universal plug and play or wireless protected setup. Turn that stuff off. Turn wireless, WPS and UPnP, turn all that stuff off. UPnP is relatively rare now. It'd have to be an old router, but WPS is out there and alive. So if you have an older router, turn off also port forwarding and DMZ. These are not needed and it's unnecessary service. An even better idea in this area is just get a new router. Get a new router and a lot of these troubles go away with these old services. Change both your admin password and router password when you buy a router. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second. So in conclusion, be careful with passwords, practice safe browsing, always use multi-factor authentication and VPN, backup. This is particularly important if you're struck with ransomware. where they lock up your file and your files and you can't get access to them. Many times the only thing that will protect you there is having a robust backup architecture. Encrypt all sensitive information. Be careful with mobile devices. There's a lot of them floating around. And train. Learn how to use cybersecurity tools. Hackers, to a large extent, prey on ignorance. So, work on knowing at least basic things that can protect you in the home. So it's time to stop talking and it's time to start doing. So hacking a router 101. I'm going to get out of this. And I'll show you how to get your private IP address. Can everyone, hang on. Can everyone still see my screen? Can I get confirmation?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll go to command line here, CMD. And what you do here is you put in ipconfig. Now, I'm not going to hit enter, because if I hit enter, I will display sensitive information. Most of all, I'll display what my public IP address is, and I'm not super interested in revealing that. So instead of hitting enter here, I will drop here, and you will see with some masking the information I'm talking about. So after you hit ipconfig, you will see here your default gateway. And your default gateway, this is an IP version 6 version of it. Don't worry about that. Here's the IP version 4, 192.168.1.254. And what we're looking at is the private IP address that's been assigned to this. So the world, the outside world out here, the internet, they can't see this address because it's behind a network address translation service. So the public IP address out here, so you got, here's the internet, and here is this. There's no connection here between the internet and this private IP address. However, I do have a router and it has a public IP address, and that's what's masking this inside of here. That's what I'm concealing. All right, so let's do what we say we're going to do. And what we'll do is come out here to Chrome, and we'll do HTTP. And we'll wait. And now I'm on my router. And what I want to point out here while I'm on my router is just some of the things that we talked about. First of all, you'll notice that we are using WPA2, which WPA2 is what you want to be using. WEP is pretty much useless. If you're using WEP, and I'm using the word watermelon, echo, papa, it's useless. You want to make sure you're using WPA2. Notice here too, if you ever sit around and go, I wonder if people are on my router. I wonder if people are getting on my router and doing things or enjoying my Netflix or something. Here you can see an example of some of the things that are connected to my router. Another way to handle this, to throw people off your router, is obviously to change the password. So we'll cover that here in a second. So let's switch over to wireless now. And you will notice that here is Wi-Fi protected setup. And you notice that I have it disabled. So I've disabled that. Obviously, I have to have wireless interface on or I can't do anything. Here you'll see where I'm broadcasting, and I kind of changed this for purposes of this presentation. You either want to disable SSID. You don't want the world to be able to see AT&T 443 Mary or something like that. So you can either disable it. When people come to your home, they won't be able to find your network, natively like they normally do. Or at least change this to where it's, what the joke I have with my students is change it to FBI cybercrimes or something. Do a honeypot, right? So anyway, this is, I'm not going to go through all of these right now. You can go into settings here also. Oh, let me see. Hang on. You can go into settings for the firewall. And you can see the firewall is on and running, which is exactly what you want to see. You can also do the following. Do home. It's kind of slow here. And you can do settings. And you can see here some of the data related to the DSL. What I want to point out here, though, is password. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. This is the password not for someone who comes to your home and says, I want to hop on your Wi-Fi. This is the administrative password. And I want to show you a huge vulnerability here that exists. So let me put in the incorrect password. So I just put in a couple of different characters here. And watch when I hit submit. It says login failed. So if you hit I forgot the password, what you can do is it says password hint, system password is on the label. So if someone comes to your house, someone that's working on your house, someone that cleans your house, someone that's just visiting your house, if they take a picture of this label, they can get a lot of information that helps them, and they potentially can reset your router remotely. Of course, with this, you have not seen my public IP address, but if they had any, training at all, they could access the public IP address, access this router, and of course, the label has a wealth of information. So just be careful with that. There's a lot of stuff that can cause trouble in that space, and you just may not be aware of it. With that, I would like to conclude by thanking you and asking if you have any questions.
So thanks a bunch, Professor Lineros. Excellent advice, and I think all of them should be followed. But if nothing else, just pick 3 things that you liked, understood well, and then do them. Right? Do something. And I'll tell you, I have been a victim of cybercrime, of ransomware 5 years ago. Fortunately, backup saved me. But I'll tell you, we all carry months or years worth of photos on our computers. We may lose lifetime of memories. So at least 1 point from my side. Anybody can be a victim. At least I think so, because having been one. All right. So there was a question on chat from Noshin. I don't know if you are able to see the chat, otherwise I'll read it for you.
Is it the one that begins regarding safe browsing?
Yes.
Okay, let me read it right quick. Well, if you use, again, here we get into the efficiency versus security. If you use standard protection, your network throughput, your processing will be a little bit faster. I would recommend using advanced protection and then seeing how bad it slows down your functionality. If your functionality slows down to a level that you feel is unacceptable, then you can make a different decision. But I myself like to start with the highest level of protection and then ratchet it down, instead of starting with what some of these vendors have, which is no protection, and they're counting on you to increase security. That would be my recommendation.
Oh, thank you so much. So when I was going through it, sorry to interrupt. So I saw that it was already picked the no protection. So I went on to the standard one and I was looking at it. It didn't give me any problem per se regarding browsing any through the website, but I was skeptical about using the advanced because I don't know how slow it's gonna make me when I was gonna go through the research regarding any project work or anything.
You can always back off. You can always back off.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks. And I just want to say, and this is advertisement for, I'm sharing my screen. And we have this ITDS department is also doing this Cyber Messenger program, Cyber Mentor program, where you'll get a certificate. If you do a certain things, you are basically a volunteer. And we have shared, based on the information we received from like Professor Lineros, from our previous speakers, we started putting together, I'll show you a document really quickly. I'm not going to go through it. It's a detailed document. We started putting together what we call practices, right? That's something you do. And so we have some practices which you should do always, some you do periodically, and some you do one time. Like, Professor Lineros mentioned, fixing your router, passwords and things like that. So out of these practices, we are asking the volunteers to pick 5 practices, any 5 that they feel comfortable with, and talk to 5 of their people in the sphere of influence, like your parents or your friends or whoever you think can benefit. And by teaching others, you learn even more, right? Everybody, I think all faculty members here would agree with me on that. So if you want to run something well, start spreading the message. Reach out to me, and it's a wonderful program, and we hope a lot of you will take advantage of that. With that, I'll just mention quickly that we had, and before I mention anything more, thanks a bunch, Professor Lineros. It was very helpful. And the slides and the recording will be available to anyone for later on. We have already posted our previous recording from October 2nd on our registration page. You can check it out here. I will also be posting today's recording over there. And next week, we have 4 wonderful speakers. We will have Professor Ken talking about our department and what are UNT's cybersecurity initiatives. We have Mike Brzezinski from Goldman Sachs, and he'll be talking about insiders and email compromise. And we are all studying here to be part of businesses and enterprises. And let me tell you, one of the big factor that is not always understood is insiders, people who know things attacking your organization or your business. And we want to hear that from somebody who deals with financial security all the time. We also have George Reeves from a Cybersecurity Alliance. It's a national level agency, federal agency. They're going to talk about critical national infrastructure. I don't think we all think about, is my power grid, the power that I get home, is vulnerable? We don't know that. Is my water line vulnerable? Do we know that? Because that's the level of security that needs to be managed at the national level, and we'll come to know about it. And we'll also come to know about various careers that you can have in cybersecurity. It is both rewarding and also very interesting to have that, to be in that career. So that's what we are going to talk about on October 23rd. And finally, on October 30th, we have another 4 wonderful speakers. We are going to hear about cyber attacks on an organization. We will also hear more about national level infrastructure cybersecurity, because it's a very important subject for all of us to know. And when many of you will start working for an organization, you should carry this information, that how nation is being kept secure by our federal agencies, and how it impacts your own business, no matter which business you are in. And finally, we will have information from the CISO's team, UNT CISO. They know what all of us may be creating issues for each other, right? We are all in the same organization. If my email is compromised and you get a bad email from me, you will read it. If I send you a link, you will think, oh, this came from a faculty member, it must be something important, and you will click on it. And many other things that we'll hear from the CISO's team. So again, thanks a bunch for Professor Lineros. Thank you all for participating, and have a good evening and have a good weekend. Thank you so much.